Imagine a communications outpost, right? You're sitting in the dark just watching the telemetry of an entire empire.
Yeah, monitoring literally 1,000 worlds.
Exactly. And one day, this dot on the far eastern edge of the map just goes dark.
Just vanishes.
Right. There's no distress signal, there's no static, it's just an absence. And then, a week later, 3 more dots vanish from the grid.
Which is terrifying if you think about the scale of that.
It really is. So eventually you send a scout ship, right, to investigate this highly populated, super heavily fortified planet that should be, just bustling with industry.
But they don't find that.
No. When that scout ship arrives, they don't find ruins. They don't find, blast craters or conquerors planting a flag. They find bare rock.
Just absolute desolation.
Literally, the text says even the bacteria in the soil is gone. The atmosphere has been siphoned away. The oceans are dry. The planet hasn't just been killed. It's been completely erased.
And that is the ultimate violation of the natural order as the Imperium understood it at the time. You're describing the exact moment a galaxy-spanning empire realizes they're no longer the apex predator.
Which is a huge theme for our deep dive today.
It really is. Because up until this point, right, the Imperium of Man operated on this fundamental assumption of invulnerability. They face constant war, yes.
Right, but they face rivals.
Exactly,
right.
Rivals. And rivals want territory or, resources or ideological dominance. But what you're describing is the arrival of a predator that just wants to feed.
Just wants to eat you. So for everyone listening, we are looking at a stack of sources today. Primarily, we're centering on the historical records compiled in a text called Behemoth, the first shadow over Ultramar.
A fantastic source, by the way.
Oh, it's incredible. And our mission for this deep dive is to really explore this absolute paradigm shift that occurred in the year 745 of the 41st millennium.
The arrival of High Fleet Behemoth.
Right, because this isn't just military history. It's the story of a civilization looking into the void of the Eastern Fringe and realizing the void is looking back with this terrifying, calculated hunger.
And to really grasp the magnitude of High Fleet Behemoth, we have to look at the psychological infrastructure of the Imperium at this time.
What do you mean by that? Like their mindset?
Yeah, exactly. Their entire doctrine of galactic warfare was built around recognizable threats. You have secessionists, you have ancient alien empires.
The forces of chaos, things like that.
You understand their motives. You have millennia of tactical data on exactly how to counter them.
So you have a playbook.
Exactly. You have a massive playbook. But Behemoth wasn't just a new enemy. It was this opening salvo that rendered every single tactical manual totally obsolete overnight.
Just threw the playbook out the window.
Threw it out the window and burned it. It completely shattered their understanding of their own place in the universe.
And I want you, the listener, to really think about that for a second. Think about a moment in your own life where a sudden, unprecedented crisis completely bypassed all your defenses.
Just blindsided you.
Yeah. It just shatters your sense of security. The rules you lived by suddenly didn't apply. Now scale that feeling of helplessness up to a galactic empire with 1 trillion soldiers.
It's hard to even fathom.
It is. How do you respond when a force of nature kicks the door down and forces your absolute greatest champions to their knees?
Well, you scramble, and initially you fail.
Brutally.
Because the human mind, even on a macro scale, right?
Yeah.
It tries to force new data into old frameworks.
Which is exactly what happened here.
Yeah. When the Tyranids first arrived, the Imperium tried to fight them like a conventional armada, and that was their first fatal mistake.
Let's dig into that arrival, because the geography, or I guess the astrophotography, sets the stage perfectly for this.
The Eastern Fringe.
Right. The Eastern Fringe, it's the absolute borderland of known space. It's the frontier looking out into the literal intergalactic void.
The deep dark.
Yeah. And the source texts describe this unknown horror emerging from the galactic southeast as a, quote, spear thrust into the heart of the Imperium.
They use some very evocative language in those initial reports.
They really do. They use the phrase berserker rush to describe this advance that showed basically zero subtlety and devoured everything with terrifying speed.
But that phrase, berserker rush, it's actually the perfect example of the Imperium misinterpreting the data.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, they see speed, right? They see absolute devastation. So they categorize it as mindless aggression, just a berserk.
Right, just swinging wildly.
Exactly. But if we break down the logistics of what a spear thrust actually entails on a galactic scale, It is anything but mindless
Because of the distance.
because of the energy.
Yeah.
Moving a biological armada of that sheer mass across the interstellar void requires a staggering conservation of energy.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And to suddenly accelerate and then penetrate heavily defended border sectors without a single distress signal getting out, that requires synchronized disruption.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying they were disrupting communications before they even hit the planets? Because the text just talks about them physically overwhelming the defenses.
The physical overwhelming is just the final stage of the attack.
Okay.
What the Imperium didn't understand yet was the mechanism of the hive mind. The Tyranids project this psychic static. It's called the shadow in the warp,
Right, the shadow and the warp.
and it literally smothers faster-than-light communication. The astropaths on those border worlds, the psychic communicators, they were likely driven mad or completely silenced weeks before the bioships even entered orbit.
Oh, wow. So they were essentially blindfolded.
Exactly. The Blitzkrieg wasn't just fast, it was completely insulated. By blinding the prey first, the predator ensures that overwhelming brute force can be applied without any coordinated resistance forming.
Okay, that completely reframes the idea of a berserker for me. It's not, a drunken brawler swinging wildly. It's like a Category 5 hurricane that also has the ability to cut the phone lines of the city it's about to destroy.
That is a terrifyingly accurate analogy, actually.
It's highly calculated brute force, but, I mean, even with the communications blacked out, they eventually have to hit a target significant enough to leave a permanent scar.
And that brings us to the planet Tyran.
Right, Tyran.
Tyran is where the abstract terror of silence became a very concrete physical nightmare.
The source notes that Tyran was an isolated Adeptus Mechanicus outpost. And, I mean, anyone familiar with the Adeptus Mechanicus knows that an outpost belonging to the priesthood of Mars is not a soft target.
Definitely not.
These are heavily armed, mathematically precise custodians of technology. They worship machines, right? And they view flesh as a weakness.
Which is deeply ironic, given what happens to them.
Extremely. So for the source to describe the aftermath at Tyran with the words, all life stripped, it's just a chilling juxtaposition.
It's the ultimate technological humiliation. The Adeptus Mechanicus, they rely on the arrogance of steel. They build fortresses that can withstand orbital bombardment.
Right, massive planetary shields and all that.
Yeah, and they employ weapons that can atomize continents. But the Tyranid swarm doesn't engage in a siege.
They don't care about your walls.
They don't care about your void shields or your macro cannons.
Yeah.
We really have to look at the actual mechanism of a Tyranid planetary consumption to understand what all life stripped really means in this context.
Because it's not just killing the defenders, it's a total ecological harvest.
Exactly. It's an ecosystem replacement. Once the orbital defenses are overwhelmed, the bioships literally seed the atmosphere with spores that aggressively alter the climate.
So they terraform it, or I guess xenoform it?
Xenotexture, yeah.
Yeah.
They drop billions of these vanguard organisms whose sole biological imperative is to kill and drag the corpses into massive, artificially grown digestion pools.
Just huge vats of acid, basically.
Yeah. The temperature of the planet spikes, the oceans literally boil, and then these capillary towers, these things are the size of mountains, they erupt from the crust to just siphon the resulting biological slurry back up into the ships in orbit.
That is so disgusting.
It is. So when the Mechanicus finally arrived to investigate Tyran, they didn't find breached bunkers. They found a planet where the bedrock itself had been scraped clean of organic matter.
The atmosphere was just gone.
Completely gone. It was a sterilized marvel floating in space.
The absolute horror of realizing that you aren't fighting an enemy that wants to conquer your fortress. They just want to eat the microorganisms in the dirt underneath it.
It's completely alien.
But out of that total planetary sterilization, we actually get the catalyst for the Imperium's entire response, right? The ultimate black box.
Yes, Inquisitor Cryptman.
Right. Inquisitor Cryptman recovers a data codex from the dead surface of Tyran.
And that data codex is the pivot point of galactic history. Cryptman descends onto this sterilized rock, somehow locates a surviving cogitator array deep beneath the surface, and he manages to extract the final telemetry.
Put yourself in Cryptman's shoes for a second. The isolation of that moment must have been just maddening.
You're standing on a dead world.
Yeah, you decrypt the visual feeds, you read the sensor logs, and you literally watch a mechanical fortress get digested by a billion chittering organisms.
And you realize, in that exact second, that an extinction-level event is moving toward the galactic core.
Exactly. You're the only person holding the black box. You know the plane is going down, but the rest of the Empire is just entirely oblivious.
And you have to take that data back to the Ordo Xenos, the alien hunting branch of the Inquisition. and somehow convince an entrenched bureaucratic nightmare of an empire to completely restructure their military posture.
Before the wave hits them.
Right, which is nearly impossible.
Which actually brings up a detail in the source that I found totally fascinating. When Kripman presents this data, the Ordo Xenos officially names the threat. They call it Behemoth.
Behemoth, yeah.
They reach back into ancient mythological human history to name this completely alien force.
In that naming convention, it reveals a massive vulnerability in imperial psychology.
Really? How so?
Well, when the human mind is confronted with the incomprehensible, it desperately searches for a point of reference to maintain sanity, right?
Like trying to put it in a box you understand?
Exactly. By calling it Behemoth, they're trying to put a familiar mask on the monster.
It's like saying, hey, we don't know the physics of how this thing digests a planet, but we know what a monster is, and we have ancient stories of humanity slaying monsters. It's an attempt to exert control through language.
Precisely. But it's a very dangerous comfort. By naming it after a singular mythological beast, they subconsciously framed it as a discrete entity that could be hunted and killed.
Oh, they thought it was just one big target.
Right, it reinforced their standard warfare doctrine. They assumed if they could just put enough guns in front of it, they could slay the beast. They didn't yet understand that Behemoth wasn't a beast.
It was just a tendril.
It was merely a single probing tendril of a macroorganism the size of a galaxy.
And the tragedy is, Behemoth didn't exactly pause to let the Imperium process the data or, debate the nomenclature.
No, it just kept coming.
Kripman's discovery was just the preamble, because the momentum of that spear thrust carried it inward, carving a trail of ruin that proved absolutely nowhere was safe.
The literal trail of dead worlds.
Yeah. And the sequence of planets they hit next is staggering. Let's look at Prandium. The text refers to it as the, quote, jewel of Ultramar.
The consumption of prandium is the moment the theoretical threat became an existential reality for the Imperium's greatest defenders.
Because it hit the Ultramarines.
Exactly. Ultramar is the domain of the Ultramarines Space Marine chapter. It is an autonomous sub-empire known for extreme efficiency, military perfection, and pristine worlds.
It's the gold standard. It's like the proof that the Imperium's brutal methods actually yield a paradise in some corners of the galaxy.
And Prandium was the crown jewel of that paradise. A world of oceans, forests, and just thriving ecosystems.
A perfect planet.
Yeah. When Behemoth hit Prandium, the Ultramarines mounted a desperate, fully coordinated defense. They deployed their absolute best tactical doctrines formulated by their founding Primarch over 10 millennia ago.
The ultimate playbook.
The ultimate playbook.
Yeah.
And it utterly failed. Prandium wasn't just conquered, it was digested, just like Terran.
The psychological blow of that failure is just hard to overstate. It's not just a military defeat, it's an ideological shattering.
It broke their worldview.
It's watching the monster casually snap the hero's supposedly unbreakable sword. If the perfect soldiers, using the perfect tactics on their own heavily fortified home turf, cannot stop this thing from drinking the oceans of their most beautiful world, I mean, what hope does the rest of the galaxy have?
Exactly, and that failure at Prandium acts as the causal link to the next major event in the source material, which is the Lacrima Dolorosa system.
Right, because everyone is panicking now.
Oh, massive panic. Because the Ultramarines' perfect doctrine failed, the wider Imperium panicked. The text outlines a fact-finding crusade launched by several Space Marine chapters into the Lacrima Dolorosa system to learn how to fight this new enemy.
Just the phrase fact-finding crusade, the sheer desperation in that phrasing. You do not launch the elite, genetically modified super soldiers of the Imperium on a crusade just to gather facts unless you are completely out of ideas.
And we have to look at what that actually means on the ground. They are treating an active apocalyptic war zone as a brutal live-fire laboratory.
Which is insane.
It is. Space Marine chapters are deploying into the Lacrima Dolorosa system, knowing they cannot win the overarching strategic campaign. They are dropping into the meat grinder for the sole purpose of gathering tactical data.
It's basically testing theories with their lives, like, does this plasma configuration penetrate their carapace? No, the squad was wiped out. Okay, relay that telemetry back up to the flagship and try a different frequency on the next drop.
That's exactly what it was.
The cold mathematical attrition of that strategy is horrifying. They are feeding their own elite troops to the swarm just to figure out how thick the armor is.
It really highlights the agonizing transition the Imperium is undergoing. They're bleeding heavily just to learn the basic physics of their enemy.
Just to figure out what they're looking at.
Right. But while the Space Marines are dying for data in Lacrima Dolorosa, Behemoth itself provides a piece of intelligence completely by accident.
And it happens at Solemnus.
Yes.
Okay, this is the detail that completely derailed my understanding of the Tyranids. The text explicitly mentions Solemnus. And for context for you listening, Solemnus is a dormant tomb world belonging to the Necrons.
Right, the ancient robot skeletons.
Yeah, a race of ancient, soulless, metallic androids. There is zero biological life on Solemnus, and the source states that Behemoth's tendrils made major course corrections to avoid the system entirely.
Which is the Rosetta Stone for understanding the true nature of the hive mind.
It changes everything.
It does. Up until Solemnus, Imperial tacticians, despite Crittman's warnings, they still largely viewed Behemoth as a ravenous, localized swarm, a plague of locusts just moving blindly forward and eating whatever was in his path.
I mean, blind locusts don't pull a handbrake turn to avoid a specific field of stone.
No, they don't.
Behemoth detecting Solemnus is fascinating because it proves the hive mind can differentiate between organic prey and the living metal of a dormant Necron tomb from light years away.
Across the void.
Yes. It scanned a world of slumbering machines, calculated that there was absolutely zero caloric return on investment, and actually corrected the course of a biological armada to avoid it.
It completely redefines them from mindless beasts to a hyper-intelligent macroorganism. I mean, think about the sensory apparatus required to achieve that.
It's mind-boggling.
They aren't just sniffing out prey in the local atmosphere. They are analyzing planetary compositions across interstellar distances. To the Tyranids, engaging the Necrons isn't just useless, it's a net negative energy expenditure.
Right, because they lose troops.
Exactly. Fighting living metal requires biomass to replace the casualties, but yields no biomass in return. It's a mathematical dead end.
So the Berserker narrative is completely dead. This is a highly calculating predator. But, by avoiding Solemnus, Behemoth essentially acted like a funnel.
Yes, that course correction concentrated the swarm.
This unstoppable adaptive mass of bioships was no longer spreading out evenly. It was concentrated, bypassing the dead rock and aiming straight at the only obstacle left on the eastern fringe that possessed both the massive biomass they craved and the military defiance to stand in their way.
Marneus Calgar and the Archer Marines. They had nowhere else to retreat. The funnel of Solemnus pointed the spear directly at Macragge.
The homeworld.
The homeworld.
The source describes the ensuing Battle of Macragge as this apocalyptic climax that decided the fate of the Imperium's eastern flank. Marneus Calgar, the chapter master, draws an absolute line in the sand. He basically declares that the Hive fleet will be halted here.
And the strategic necessity of holding Macragge cannot be overstated. If Macragge falls, the Ultramarines as a cohesive military structure basically cease to exist.
It would be the end of them.
The entire eastern fringe collapses into anarchy, and the route to the densely populated galactic core to Terra itself is laid wide open.
But on a psychological level, too, right? After the humiliation of Plandium, Calgar needed to prove that the Imperium could still anchor itself. He needed to prove that humanity could still dictate terms to the universe.
It's a do-or-die moment on a species-wide scale. And the text describes the battle playing out across multiple desperate tiers simultaneously. You have this massive orbital engagement, and while the sky is burning, there's a relentless surface war on the planet below.
Let's start with the orbital defense, because the mechanics of fighting living ships are just bizarre.
They really are.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about standard naval warfare where you target the enemy's plasma engines or the bridge.
Right.
The Imperial Navy is facing a biological armada. These are massive living organisms that void the vacuum of space. They possess chitinous armor thicker than adamantium plating.
Which is insane.
And they don't fire lasers. They spit concentrated bioplasma that just melts right through void shields. They launch boarding torpedoes that are actually giant fleshy pods filled with thousands of gene stealers that immediately start slaughtering the crew from the inside out.
It's a completely asymmetric nightmare. The Imperial fleet is built for broadsides and structural integrity, and they are fighting an enemy that uses its own massive body mass to ram and latch onto hulls, literally digesting ships in orbit.
Yeah, eating them while they're flying.
Those source notes, the Imperial fleet was all but destroyed. They were fundamentally outmatched by the sheer biological volume of the Tyranid swarm.
And while the orbital tethers are snapping and, flaming debris is raining down into the atmosphere, the surface war on Macragge becomes a battle of absolute attrition.
It's just a meat grinder down there.
The Tyranid strategy is simple. Overwhelm the defenders with millions of expendable vanguard organisms, drain their ammunition, and then send in the apex bioforms to crack the fortresses.
Which brings us to a detail in the source that is easily the most haunting imagery in the entire text.
The Polar Fortress.
The defense of the Northern Polar Fortress. The fate of the Ultramarines' first company.
The first company represents the pinnacle of the Ultramarines. These are veterans of hundreds of campaigns equipped in Terminator armor.
And for those who don't know, Terminator armor is, what, like the heaviest thing you can wear?
It's the heaviest, most impenetrable personal tank suits the Imperium can manufacture. They are the immovable object.
And the text states that the entire first company was wiped out defending this polar fortress. But it's the aftermath that really sticks with you.
The visual of it.
Yeah. When the relief forces finally broke through the mountains of Tyranid corpses after the battle, they found the Terminators. They were dead. But they were standing in a perfect, unbroken circle, having fought back-to-back to the last man.
We need to dissect the anatomy of that final stand, because it speaks volumes about both the psychology of the Space Marines and the terrifying reality of the Tyranids.
Okay.
For a Terminator squad to be entirely eradicated, the sheer volume of organic mass crashing against them must have been incalculable. We are talking about mountains of alien bodies literally piling up against their guns until the barrels melted.
But the perfect circle, it means the line never broke.
Exactly. There was no panic. There was no rout. The immense discipline required to form a defensive ring as a relentless tide of alien horrors closes in, just shutting out the sky.
They didn't run.
They didn't even flinch. They literally anchored themselves to each other. They trusted the warrior beside them perfectly. They fought until every single bolter round was spent, every power fist was drained, and every drop of blood was given.
It's incredible.
It is the ultimate tragic expression of martial duty. They performed perfectly, and they still died.
It's cinematic, but it's just mathematically brutal. They didn't lose their nerve. They were just overwhelmed by an equation that did not care about their legendary status.
Right.
But as incredible as the sacrifice at the Polar Fortress was, the ground war didn't actually save Macrage. The turning point of the entire invasion happened back up in orbit in the debris field of the shattered Imperial Navy.
The sacrifice of the Dominus Astra.
According to the text, the Dominus Astra was an Emperor-class battleship, and it saved a planet not by firing some superweapon, but by ramming directly into the densest concentration of the Tyranid Hive fleet.
Yes.
And the captain didn't just ram them. He gave the order to detonate the ship's warp drives in real space.
To understand the gravity of this, we have to explain the physics of warp drives in this universe. A warp drive is this piece of esoteric technology that allows a ship to travel faster than light by tearing a temporary hole into the immaterium.
The warp.
Yeah, a parallel dimension of chaotic, raw energy. Ships use Geller fields to protect themselves while they ride those currents.
Right. You punch a hole, you step carefully through, and you close the door behind you.
Exactly. Deliberately detonating the drive without containment is the equivalent of tearing the fabric of reality apart and refusing to let it heal. The Geller fields fail. The raw, catastrophic energy of the immaterium violently bleeds into real space.
Just spills out.
It creates a localized, uncontrolled vortex. Essentially, a black hole made of pure chaos that aggressively sucks everything in the physical vicinity into a hell dimension.
I really want you, the listener, to visualize the sheer scale of this desperate maneuver. You have this towering, Gothic cathedral of a spaceship, miles long, accelerating directly into the center of a writhing biological armada.
Epic.
The captain watches the swarm basically black out the stars through the viewports. He gives the order. The drive goes critical. The laws of physics just fold in on themselves. And this screaming terror in reality swallows the heart of the Tyranid swarm, along with the Dominus Astra and her entire crew, dragging them into the void.
It's a spectacular end to the immediate threat.
Yeah.
But we have to analyze the tactical implications of that choice.
What do you mean?
Well, the Dominus Astra was a relic. It was a battleship the Imperium likely could no longer replicate. The sheer cost in hardware, history, and human life is staggering.
Which raises a really crucial question for this whole event. Is the sacrifice of the Dominus Astra a soaring testament to Imperial ingenuity and the human spirit? Or is it absolute proof that their conventional warfare had utterly failed?
It is undeniably the latter. You do not detonate a warp drive in real space if your macro cannons are winning the fight. You don't deliberately tear a hole in reality if your tactical doctrines are holding the line.
Right, it's a panic button.
It is the ultimate desperate measure. It's flipping over the chessboard because you realize the opponent has you in checkmate and you refuse to let them win the game. It is a tacit admission that against the Tyranids, standard Imperial military strategy was completely impotent.
And the cost totally reflects that desperation.
Yeah.
The text calls the toll of Macragge extraordinary.
Ah.
Marnius Calgar, the architect of the defense, is gravely wounded. The first company is gone. The orbital shipyards are ruined.
The planet is battered.
Yeah. The vortex eventually collapses, the sky clears, but the silence on Macragge in the aftermath must have been suffocating.
It's a Pyrrhic victory in every sense of the word. The Ultramarines survived, the Eastern Fringe held, but the foundation of their supremacy was cracked forever.
Which transitions us perfectly to the day after the apocalypse. The adrenaline fades, the smoke clears, and you have to look at what's left. Because winning a battle that leaves your empire shattered fundamentally changes who you are. We have to look at the true cost and the fractured legacy of Behemoth.
And the source material is very clear, that the destruction of Behemoth's primary fleet was not the end.
Right.
It was merely the violent birth of the Tyrannic Wars. And the most immediate consequence was a massive cultural shift within the Ultramarines themselves.
The text actually states that the Ultramarines were deeply humbled, and that they learned the Codex Astartes was a guide, not a rigid doctrine, and they began developing entirely new, specialized strategies based on Inquisitor Kryptman's data.
We really need to emphasize what an ideological earthquake it is for the Ultramarines to alter their relationship with the Codex Astartes.
It's a huge deal.
This isn't just a field manual, it is their holy tactical scripture, penned by Robert Guilliman, their founding demigod. For 10,000 years, it was considered infallible. Every flank maneuver, every supply line, every squad deployment was dictated by the mathematical perfection of this book.
It's like telling a deeply religious order that their sacred text, the literal word of their creator, is actually just a collection of helpful suggestions that they are free to ignore if the situation calls for it.
Which is wild.
That is heresy in almost any other context in the Imperium.
Exactly. To admit that the Codex is just a guide is to admit that their ancestors didn't have all the answers. It's an admission of vulnerability. Humbled by the sheer incomprehensible nature of Behemoth, they are forced to evolve.
They had to adapt.
Because the brutal reality was staring them in the face. If they had rigidly adhered to the Codex against an enemy that doesn't obey any known laws of physics, biology, or warfare, they would have gone extinct at Macragge. Dogma had to die so the chapter could live. Kryptman's data, the cold, hard facts of the Tyranid threat, became the new foundation.
And it wasn't just a philosophical problem they were left to deal with. There was a very real physical legacy left behind in the dark corners of the galaxy. The source notes that Behemoth's defeat at Macragge did not mean its absolute end. The Hive fleet splintered into countless smaller fragments that continued to plague the galaxy for centuries.
The lingering terror of the splinter fleets. When the Dominus Astra detonated and dragged the core bioships into the warp, it severed the localized synaptic control that held the massive swarm together.
Cut off the head.
Yes. The macroorganism lost its brain in that sector. But the surviving organisms, the ships on the periphery, they didn't just die. Their base survival instincts took over, and they scattered.
I picture it like swinging a hammer into a massive pane of glass, right? You stop the main impact. The glass isn't a solid barrier anymore, but the kinetic energy shatters it, and now you have a million razor-sharp shards embedded everywhere in the room.
Oh, that's good.
You stop the pain from crushing you, but you are going to be stepping on those shards, causing localized bleeding for decades.
That analogy perfectly captures the logistical nightmare the Imperium inherited. Dealing with a unified invasion force is terrifying, but it's a matter of grand strategy. You marshal your fleets, you draw a line in the sand, and you fight a massive set-piece battle.
Right.
But dealing with splinter fleets, that is a never-ending nightmare of guerrilla warfare and planetary quarantines.
Because a single surviving Tyranid bioship crashing on some isolated agricultural world can completely ruin the sector.
Precisely. That single ship will seed the local environment with gene sealers and vanguard organisms. They will burrow into the planetary infrastructure, multiply in the shadows, infect the local populace, and eventually overrun the planetary defense forces before the Imperium even realizes the world has fallen.
It's a deadly localized infection.
Yeah. The Ultramarines had to pivot from being a grand army to playing a desperate game of galactic whack-a-mole, hunting down these splinter fleets one by one.
So you read that and you think, okay, the Ultramarines evolved. They abandoned rigid dogma. They created specialized Tyranid hunting veteran squads. They are tracking down the splinters.
Right, they're stepping up.
It almost sounds like a silver lining. They learned, they adapted, and they survived to fight another day.
And that is the final trap the Imperium falls into. The illusion of a concluded narrative.
Because then we hit the final section of our source material, and it completely pulls the rug out from under you. When you realize the actual mechanism of why the Tyranids fought the way they did at Macragge, it takes the story from a tale of heroic survival and turns it into a chronicle of pure existential dread.
The text refers to it as the ultimate horror of Behemoth. The dreadful truth that the Ordo Xeno slowly uncovered was that 745.M41 was not a single isolated invasion.
That wasn't the big one.
No. Behemoth was just the vanguard. It was the first wave of a far greater, incredibly patient predator.
If we look back at the entirety of this deep dive, all the bizarre anomalies suddenly make sense. The aggressive rush from the eastern fringe, the total ecological consumption of prandium, the calculated avoidance of the Necrons on Solemnus, and the apocalyptic grinding clash at the polar fortress on Macragge. None of it was a desperate attempt to conquer the Imperium.
It was a stress test.
It was a test.
And we have to explain the biological mechanism of that stress test because it is the most terrifying concept in the entire lore. The source explicitly says that Behemoth tested the defenders and gathered invaluable data on their tactics. And it did this through genetic memory.
Genetic memory. This completely recontextualizes what the digestion pools on Tyran and Prandium were actually doing. When we talked earlier about them stripping a planet of all life, they aren't just eating for caloric energy. They're absorbing information.
Exactly. The Tyranid bioships house massive, hyper-intelligent organisms known as Norn queens. These entities are the genetic factories of the swarm. When Tyranid warrior kills a space marine on the ground, or more importantly, when a Tyranid warrior is killed by a space marine,
The biomass gets recycled.
right, the biological matter of that encounter is eventually reclaimed by the swarm. The Norn queens break down the physical DNA of the prey, but through the synaptic web of the hive mind, they also absorb the neural pathways, the combat experiences, and the tactical algorithms that the prey utilized.
It's like a terrifying open source algorithm. It's as if the hive mind is a massive machine learning program that updates its entire network's defense protocols every single time it encounters resistance.
That's exactly what it is.
Only here, the data they are uploading isn't code. It's the blood, the bone, and the tactical sacrifice of the Imperium's best soldiers.
Think about the first company at the Polar Fortress. We lauded their sacrifice. They fought back-to-back in a perfect circle, displaying the absolute zenith of Imperial defensive doctrine.
But in doing so,
They provided the hive mind with a perfect, high-resolution scan of how the ultimate space marine fights when backed into a corner. The Tyranids consumed the bodies of the first company, and the Norn queens digested the tactical genius that made those Terminators so effective. They essentially downloaded the Codex Astartes through the blood of its greatest practitioners.
that is just staggering. I want you listening right now to really sit with the dread of that realization. You are Marneus Calgar. You gave everything. You sacrificed your flagship. You lost your first company. Your pristine worlds were turned to bare rock.
You lost so much.
You fought the hardest, most devastating battle in your empire's history, and you barely scraped by with a Pyrrhic victory. And then years later, you realize your hardest-fought victory was merely a scouting mission for the enemy. You showed them your absolute best cards, you played your perfect hand, and now they own the deck.
It means the Tyranids did not lose at Macragge. The hive mind simply spent Hive Fleet Behemoth as a necessary currency. They paid in millions of bioships to purchase the knowledge of how their prey defends its most vital organs.
They just bought data.
The Imperium is now trapped in a war of attrition against an enemy that physically evolves to counter every strategy used against it. The next Hive Fleet won't fall for the same orbital traps. The next wave of ground troops will be bred with thicker carapace, specifically designed to deflect ultramarine bolter fire.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize this incredible journey we've just been on. We started in the dark void of the Eastern Fringe with the sudden, inexplicable silence of Tyran, the terrifying blitzkrieg that stripped a Mechanicus world down to its bedrock and handed Inquisitor Krippman the ultimate horrifying black box.
From there, we tracked the failure of perfection. The tragic loss of Prandium shook the Ultramarines to their ideological core and forced the brutal, live-fire attrition of the Lacrima Dolorosa Crusade.
Feeding soldiers to the machine to learn.
Yeah. And we explored the anomaly of Solanus, proving that Behemoth was a cold, calculating macroorganism, efficiently bypassing the Necrons to funnel its strength toward the ultimate prize.
And then we witnessed the absolute apocalypse at Macragge. Marneus Calgar's desperate line in the sand, The heartbreaking perfect circle of the first company Terminators holding the polar fortress, and the reality-tearing sacrifice of the Dominus Astra, detonating its warp drive to swallow the swarm.
And we ended with the fractured legacy, the shattering of imperial dogma, the unending guerrilla war against the splinter fleets, and the horrifying revelation of genetic memory.
That behemoth wasn't the invasion. It was the vanguard, designed to probe, stress test, and absorb the tactical doctrines of the galaxy's apex predators.
It is a phenomenal piece of lore, an absolute masterclass in building tension and scale.
It really is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final lingering thought to mull over. Something that builds right on top of this horrifying mechanism of genetic memory we've just established.
The implications are endless, but the future is undeniably dark.
If Hive Fleet Behemoth was merely a brute force test to gather data, if the hive mind deliberately sacrificed billions of organisms just to study exactly how the Imperium's greatest defenders organize a last stand, what does a truly calculated Tyranid invasion look like?
Yeah.
Now that they perfectly understand the mind, the tactics, and the sheer desperation of the Ultramarines, what happens when they apply that knowledge? If a Category 5 hurricane tearing through the eastern fringe was just them knocking on the door to see who answers, what does their endgame look like?